Okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Let me get my military voice going. Hopefully everybody won't be shy, but we'll get those comments rolling in. Hello, Julie. Good to see you here. And Silent Warrior. Awesome. Silent Weapons. Oop, that's even better. Probably apropos for this podcast too. So, look at all my wires fixed around here. So, we're going to start where we left off. We're in chapter 5 called The Secret Society. And I switch back and forth using my glasses because I'm getting old. So, chapter 5 starts us off with the kind of basically a little bit of a review of the what is referred to as the Italian clerics and members of the church's black nobility joining with the mafia forces in Operation Gladio. I realized in our last podcast, there's lots of names of mafia people and bankers and the clerics within the priests within the Catholic Church, and it's kind of hard to keep track of all of them. So I'm going to be a little bit more general tonight and not try to name as many names because it does get a little confusing. So basically, we start off talking about there were 622 stay behind units, which is Operation Gladio. And for those who haven't had the chance to watch the first two, Operation Gladio was founded in Germany, originally called werewolf units, and they were designed under a concept of a strategy of tension so that you can control countries. So they embedded, and the reason they called them werewolves is because during the day they were regular civilians and at night they were killers. They stashed literal ammo dumps of explosives, ammunition, weaponry, and cash and communication equipment so that at any moment they could be activated and go out and do a mission. They're basically terror cells. There's no other way of saying it. And they were globally set up in 1942, which, if you recall, was not before the end of World War II. So this was a transition strategy within Germany to create stay behind units because at the end of the day, what we find out with all of the reading that I've done is Germany didn't lose the war. They just changed strategies for fighting the war. Their mission was to create a pan-Europe world order. They wanted Europe to be in charge of the world. They believed Europe was not only everything that we traditionally think of as Europe, but all the way to the Ural Mountains, which is basically half of Russia, which is why you see everyone hating on Russia right now, and they have for decades, is because they want what they have. The same thing that at the beginning of the study, I realized that people like supposedly the good chancellor, the first one after World War II in Germany, Adenauer, actually said that it was their philosophy, his and all of the people that he surrounded himself with, that the African continent was their labor colony. And what I find interesting about that and why the stay behind units that are embedded in the United States, and they are here, constantly drum up the we're racist is because they're hiding the actual racist, which are who created them. And that is this global order that originally began out of the belly of Germany. So, as I said in one of our first meetings on this subject, this book specifically concentrates on America and UK's role in it, but Germany gave birth to it, and we can't ignore that. So, also, Galen, the Gehlen, when I say words that I may be mispronouncing, I want to spell them so everybody understands who we're talking about. He was the chief of Hitler's intelligence apparatus during World War II. He's the one that came up with the concept and put of the stay behind units, Operation Gladio, and he put a General Wolfe, Wolfe, in charge of them, which is where they got the name werewolf. When they were negotiating with Alan Dulles on how to transfer all of the intel apparatus and basically Galen trying to save his own skin, he told Alan Dulles that if Alan Dulles, who later on became the first CIA chief, he also was in charge of the European aspect of OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA. He made a deal with Alan Dulles that if Galen could stay as Adenauer, the new Germany without Nazis, supposedly, chief of intel, that he would tell Alan Dulles where all of the stay-behind cells were and that the UK and the US could use them as well. So that's where we're at. We're looking into how the whole thing got set up. This book at the beginning basically uses what this author has dug into the most, which is all of the Italian stay-behind units and how they facilitated drug trade and how they meshed with both the U.S. Mafia and the Italian Mafia. Because at the end of World War II, Mussolini had basically eliminated the Mafia in Italy. They rounded up and killed them all. So the same thing with the Masons. It was absolutely forbidden. If you were found out to be a Mason, you're going to get killed. So this stay behind unit concept brought all of that back out, and they are in the process where we left off as using the Vatican as a money laundering setup, because ironically, we all know Hitler was raised Catholic. We also know that many of the German officials were Catholic, and I didn't realize this until I started reading this book, but I thought the Vatican Bank had been around for centuries. The Vatican Bank was created in 1942, the same year they set up Operation Gladio. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence. So let's get back to the book. Okay, so we end up with 622 stay-behind units in Italy alone. That's crazy. 12 to 15 troops in each one of them. They were trained by U.S. and British forces. I would argue they were trained by, at this point, because we're still at the very beginning of it, those were all put in place under Hitler. Hitler and Mussolini worked very closely together, so I'm quite sure all of those were set up and trained initially by Nazis. So they also created, in addition to the normal Gladio units, they also, in 1955, set up ecclesiastical versions of them known as Catholic Gladio, which again was a news flash to me. So you now have the hierarchy within the Catholic Church having their own separate units to do their own separate things in concert with the Gladio operation overall. And we will see that, we saw that where they used Catholic priest garbs to funnel the Nazis in and out of Germany. At the end of the war, the Italian church gave them safe refuge in Spain and Italy. Several of them end up holed up in the Vatican, the primary Nazis. So the Catholic units were led by Austin B., rector of the Pontifical Biblical Institute. And then they name a whole bunch of other ones that were involved in it. They also set up an organization called Catholic Action, which will be part of the whole Gladio communication effort. All of the people that were involved in setting this stuff up were elevated to the College of Cardinals for their work in the clandestine operations. Leading lay figures of the Catholic nobility had also become prominent Catholic Gladio members, including Giulio Andrade, a co-founder of the Christian Democrat Party in Italy. Also, what we learned last time is there was the struggle between a communist party and what was referred to as the Christian Democratic Party for power. There was the struggle, and this is the strategy of tensions that you see as part of the whole operation of the Gladio units. You get a far left and a far right candidate, and you use the tension between the two to basically push all of the people where you want them to go. You use the fear of, oh my God, the left, they're communists, they're going to kill us all. And then you have the basically socialists on the right going, we have all of these extremes. We're going to be violent. We're going to have these fascist attacks on the population. And so the people are struggling between those two. And because of the fear on both sides, the New World Order International Syndicate is my word, gets to push the people, change the laws, and everybody gets herded out of fear to where they actually want you to go, which is the New World Order. They just use these as cattle prods. And that really is what you need to think. Anytime you hear the word communist, it's a cattle prod. Anytime you hear the word Nazi, it's a cattle prod. Those are two entities. It's like the company that created those two cattle prods are the exact same company because they were. We learned in Anthony Sutton's books that the industrialists that are part in bankers and political figures and all of them that were part of the international syndicate funded the creation of communism and the creation of Hitler. They literally funded both of those efforts. So they've created the left and the right. They created the cattle prods, and now they're just pushing everybody around. Didn't Mussolini give the Vatican the property? Actually, he didn't give it to them. There was a treaty signed. We talked a little bit about that last time. It was very interesting. I did not know this in the late 1800s. When all of the territory was used to create the Kingdom of Italy, basically what the church, the Catholic Church, said was their property, was part of the state that was around Rome. And so there was the problem that went on for decades. And the solution to the problem was negotiated between the King of Italy and Mussolini to give them their own enclave. So that's a great question. Okay, so we're going to move on. So we have all of the people. We also talked about the fact that all of these people end up in the inner circle of what's called the Knights of Malta, which is a knighthood bestowed by the Catholic Church. And these people use the auspices of the annual or semi-annual meeting of the Knights of Malta as an excuse to get together and plan all this stuff. So many ethnic Slovenians with leftist leanings were terrorized by the antics of the Catholic Gladio troops, that 2/3 of them ended up moving out of the location where they were being harassed. So this is just one example of how these Gladio units, well, number one, in that case, create refugees, which is what we see today. They are the ones that are creating havoc to get these people. They're cattle prodders. I just came across that, and I think I'm going to use it forever now. That's literally what they are. They're cattle prodders because they view us as cattle. So the money in the 1950s for the activities of the Catholic Gladio was provided by the CIA running drugs, which we talked about last time as well. They have an entire drug network set up, and the profits of the drugs is used to fund Operation Gladio. They focused the initial drug efforts on the Black community in the United States. But the funds, to the tune of $30 to $50 million a year in Italy alone was laundered through the Vatican Bank. That's why that bank was created, because it's critical to this operation. Former CIA agent Victor Marchetti testified that in 1950 and 60s, the CIA gave economic support to many activities promoted by Catholic Church, from orphanages to missions. Millions of dollars each year were given to a great number of bishops and monsignors. One of them was Cardinal Giovanni Montini, who eventually becomes Pope Paul VI. To protect the clandestine nature of Catholic Gladio and the other stay-behind units, meetings of the anti-communist forces were conducted in Masonic lodges. There is a particular Masonic lodge called Propaganda Do, which was labeled P2. So P2 is going to be a critical part of the organization and controlling mechanism of the stay-behind units. So just like what we saw with Adam Weishaupt in the late 1700s, he created the Illuminati. He actually created that word. He created the organization of the Illuminati and the concept of a new world order. He used the Masonic lodges all over Europe. He was a German as well. Oh, shocker. And he created all over Europe an infiltration of the Masonic lodge process. So this is not a new concept. It is the way they have always done business. This particular one that is controlling the ones in Italy is called P2. Now, being a Masonic member is forbidden in the Catholic Church. So watch how this works. So a lodge formed in 1877 by members of the Piedmont nobility. This lodge was distinctly different than most. The members were mafioso and military officers who were more concerned about political beliefs than other Masons. Initiates entered the Propaganda Mason unit, P2, were threatened with certain violence or death if they ever told the secrets of the organization. In 1924, Freemasonry in Italy was outlawed by Mussolini as politically subversive. So they had to shut their doors, roll up their ledgers. The revitalization of the lodge as Propaganda 2 met with the full approval of Allen Dulles, the CIA director, and the 33rd degree Masons. Brian and my husband's watching football, so they just had to close my door. In the 1950s, the lodges were able to provide ex-fascists with democratic cover and also gave them contacts in the American Masons to raise funds for the Red Menace. So lodges began popping up even on NATO military bases. They even named one called Benjamin Franklin, which is ironic because, of course, Benjamin Franklin was a Mason, as were many of our founding fathers. That one was established in 1959, somewhere in Germany. Pius XII, by his silence, appeared to have endorsed the rise of Freemasonry in Italy. The tacit approval was stunning, since the Catholic Church bans its members from being there under threat of excommunication. And there's a whole list of the written Catholic Church doctrine that has to do with that, but we can just suffice it to say it wasn't allowed. But such teachings suddenly paled in comparison to the Marxist doctrine, the threat of the Red Menace. So P2 also became a magnet for the mafia. Since both the mafia and the Freemasons were secret societies, it just kind of worked out. Then it goes into some gross things about what they do to people who they find don't go along with them. I will skip that part because it is gross. At the end of World War II, prominent men of respect, which was an organization including Salvador Greco and a few others, which were responsible for the fruit markets and the citrus growers, became active in the Masonic Lodge. So now they're going outside of the military and the mafia to gather more people into this Masonic initiation. By 1955, the Grand Orient of Italy could boast of such Masons, and then it names a whole bunch of very prominent uh, mafia and military people. Over the next 2 decades, 2,411 members of the mafia took orders from the Sicily's 113 lodges. That's in Sicily alone. That's crazy. Concerning this development, it was said that the Masons accounted for the the mafia version of the Masons accounted for over 3% of the Italian GDP. That's crazy. And they had basically just opened within the last couple of years after the end of World War II. So in 1965, the memberships of the P2 contained many church officials, and it goes through friars, bishops, monsignors, blah, blah, blah. Over the next decade, scores of additional Vatican officials, including cardinals, Roman Catholic hierarchs, prominent bishops, archbishops, would become members of the Masonic lodges with ties to P2. So it became so overwhelming that the author makes the point there's no way that the Pope didn't know this was happening. But they pretended like they didn't. It remains equally mind-boggling that the pontiff elevated these clerics to loftier positions after learning about their affiliation in the lodges. The Roman Catholic Church shed many of its long-held doctrines for the sake of political expediency, financial gain, including the condemnations of Freemasonry and usury. The transformation crystallized that the Pope embraced of this guy by the name of Lucio Gelli, an avowed atheist who became the Grand Master of the P2, was given a knighthood in the Night of Malta by the Pope. So now think about that. That guy's not only a atheist, he's in the Masons, and they invite him to this club because, again, the club, the Night of Malta, was not at this point being used for anything to do with the Catholic Church. It was doing the coordination for the selling of drugs and the money laundering and pretending to fight communism. In 1963, when Lucio Gelli became a Freemason and Giovanni Montini became Pope Paul VI, Gladio was no longer a clandestine operation. Information about the project had surfaced as soon as the secret armies were established. Toward the end of that year, we uncovered the existence of a black resistance movement composed of resistant fighters of the far right, Vichy collaborators, and monarchists. They had devised a secret attack plan called Plan Blue, like in blue cheese, which should have gone into action either by the end of July or August. The outcry of the secret army was dismantled only to be reassembled the next year by the head of what is referred to as the French Military Secret Service, SDECE. So now it's kind of out in the open by 1963, and yet it continues. The Austrian Sports Club. So here we have two people in 1947 that was arrested in Vienna when the Austrian police discovered that they had been recruited by this secret army of former Nazi soldiers and right-wing partisans to participate or to protect from a Soviet invasion that never happened. They concocted plans to kill any members who dared to show their face and claim that they were communists in Austria. So they go through this operation that they discover. They set up an entire organization there, and they bought cars in it. It was called Austrian Hiking Sports and Society Clubs. Because here's what's really interesting about this, because of where all of these ammo dumps were, it was out in the woods. It was in national parks. It was in less traveled entities. And what I find extremely interesting about that is when you look at like the altruistic people that created the World Wildlife Fund, the WWF, which I think is hilarious connotation there. Um, they're all about the outdoors and stuff. But what you find out is those organizations are covers and gives people excuses to be out in the forest doing all of this stuff when in fact what they're actually doing is training, having military training exercise, stashing ammunition. And I think you see that play out like in that incident that we just saw in Atlanta, where you have all of these well-trained anarchists that are coming in there to attack what the police training facility. And to me, they have all the same hallmarks as an Operation Gladio unit. I think Antifa is what that was. I think they're stay behind units. I think all of the terrorism that you see is generated by these organizations, and they're everywhere. So the presence of Gladio in Germany came to light in 1952 when Hans Otto, a former SS officer, walked into a police station. Now, again, 1952, the war's been over for almost not quite 10 years, and you've got a former SS officer even walking around in Frankfurt. He walks into the police station, says he belongs to a political resistance group, the task of which is to carry out sabotage activities and blow up bridges in case of a Soviet invasion. He said that although the initiative was made up of former Nazis, new recruits were not expected to espouse neo-fascist beliefs, but only to manifest a deep-seated hatred of communism. Otto added that the unit, which bore the name, some very long German name, abbreviations TD, BDJ, the technical service branch of the League of German Youth. So this was a point that was made in another book I read. All of those trained German youths were running around Germany doing something. And part of them ended up in the stay behind units. They had amassed a blacklist of hundreds of leftists, which is anybody they deem as communist or that they just don't want, who were to be assassinated in case of an emergency. And this is all, again, in the name of democracy. Keep that in mind. Upon questioning him, he tells them that they received millions of dollars in funding from American citizen named Sterling Garwood, who he identified as an agent of the CIA. He further said that Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen, who remained sheltered in the Vatican City, had set up the entire network. Which again that was in the book we just finished online in International Syndicate, which is also on my Substack, about the Third Way. That's where I found out about Operation Gladio. So this book basically says the same things. I just think this guy puts too much emphasis, or it doesn't put enough emphasis on who created the whole thing. Because I honestly think Germany is still in a key role today of this New World Order. Because it's the one company they never talk about, country that they never talk about, and that tells you everything. Okay, so during this same time, Germany's made up of individual states. Hessen is one of those states. Their prime minister became so alarmed by Otto's testimony that he ordered the arrest of 100 members of that unit and called for a full-scale investigation of the resistance group across Germany. The country's highest court, basically their Supreme Court, basically ordered all of the people that he had arrested released with no comment. Baffled by the court's decision, he says, quote, the only legal explanation for these releases can be that the people declared they acted upon American direction, unquote. So this is happening under Chancellor Adenauer, who, as I stated, hired basically all the same Nazis that had been Hitler's staff on his staff. And he definitely felt exactly the same way. Okay. Let's make sure I'm keeping up with the questions. Okay. Yeah, we got it all. Okay. So they talk briefly about Sweden's secret army. In 1953, additional information surfaces of Gladio units in Sweden with the arrest of Otto Hallberg, a notorious racist and former SS commander on charges of promoting terrorism. He openly admits that he is a leader of one of the stay-behind units to ward off Soviet invasion. So this is out there, and I'm dumbfounded that I spent 30 years in the military and never even heard of this. So all of this fascinates me. In 1960, the Gladio operation turned strategic when the Turkish stay-behind unit, known as the counter-guerrilla, joined with the military to stage a coup and basically got rid of their prime minister. He was planning a visit to Moscow to work out economic arrangements between the Soviets and Turkey, and they put him in jail and then executed him just for talking to the Soviets. So after civilian rule was restored by democratic elections, one of the leaders of the uprising formed a Nationalist Action Party and its paramilitary youth group. And guess what the name of that youth group is? Gray Wolves. Werewolves, anybody? And they did it with the funding of the CIA. The new party espouses a fanatical pan-Turkish ideology that calls for the reclaiming of large sections of the Soviet Union under a reborn Turkish empire. And by Turkish, they mean Ottoman Empire. So then we get to what they refer to as the Pink Pope. And Italy remained the center of the Gladio operations in their fear of their Communist Party rising up. Yet the Vatican, under Pope John, now up to the 13th, who was the successor to Pius XII, failed to condemn the communist movement in Italy. And instead, the new Pope issued an official letter to the bishops about peace on earth. Imagine that. A Pope talking about peace on earth, which represented an attempt between, they viewed it as a bridge between the Catholicism and communism. In addition, the Pope supposedly developed a fondness for Khrushchev. So he's dead man walking. In 1963, John McCone, director of the CIA, also a Knight of Malta, received a memorandum from James Spain of the agency's Office of National Estimates on the ramification of Pope John's policies. This is, no doubt, wrote Spain in a 15-page memo, that vigorous new currents are flowing in virtually every phase of the church's thinking and activities, and that was not allowed. When Spain visited the Vatican, posing as a visiting scholar on a foreign affairs grant, he voiced his concerns about the major gains made by the Italian left, i.e. communism, in the 63 elections. Many members felt that left's success was attributed to Pope John's conciliatory attitude towards communism. You just can't be nice to communists. So, learning a lesson. Director McCone now took a personal as well as a professional interest in the Vatican situation. And they already have bugs everywhere in the Vatican. We learned that in the last couple of chapters. So they upped their spying operation on the Vatican, but the CIA says they ran into a snag because this new pope had shut out all of the people that he viewed were a threat to him. Good on him. When John the 13th died of stomach cancer in 1963, the CIA under Macomb became intent upon influencing the outcome of the conclave, so we didn't get another pink pope. That's what they referred to him as. You know, he wasn't quite red, but he's pink. As if they're lily white. Wouldn't so that okay, so the agency's favored candidate was Cardinal Montini, the former Bishop of Milan, which of course we've read about, and he's all into this whole Masonic Lodge, blah, blah, blah. Montini was a ardent supporter of Catholic Gladio. He had served in the OSS during World War II in an operation called Vessel Operation, and had received millions in black funds from the CIA for his charity work as Archbishop of Milan. The relationship between Montini and the U.S. intelligence agency was so close that his ascendancy to the see of St. Peter may have been rigged. You think? Time magazine author uncovered evidence that showed the CIA officials were able to confirm the election of Montini in advance of a puff of white smoke emanating from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, and expressed their pleasure that the conclave had proceeded according to plan. One of Montini's first acts as Pope Paul VI was the appointment of Gelli, Gelli, we'll call him Gelli. Gelli just sounds awful. Who is a Knight of the Order of Sylvester, which is one of the highest ones. The knighting was extraordinary since Gelli is the atheist. So this is just crazy. We got atheists working for the Pope and the CIA picking the Pope. Okay. So I guess it's a big deal that you have, well, I mean, it's a big deal that you have an atheist in the Catholic Church, but I guess there was some prerequisites that he was supposed to have performed an act of service in the name of the Holy Mother Church. And they go through that, but I'm dumbfounded by the fact we got an atheist in the church. But nonetheless, the ceremony was of profound significance to the Gladio operatives, which of course is why it happened, since it served to confirm the close ties of the Vatican and the Mason P2 organization, as well as the Holy See's reliance on Gelli and other CIA agents to put them in prominent places. So talks about Gelli having performed duties in the Black Shirts battalion when he was fighting in Spain. He was an elite SS member working for Hermann Göring, which everybody's heard of him, famous Nazi. During the Allied occupation in 1943, he escaped incarceration by volunteering to serve with the counterintelligence group of the Fifth Army, which is how he got in close with the CIA. He worked in close concert with William Colby, who would later be the CIA boss, and Alan Dulles, who was also a CIA director, and established the Office of Reserve Affairs. This shadowy agency in Rome was manned by a secret force of carabinieri, which are the like everyday guards. They're the ones that, when I was stationed in Italy, it was kind of weird that you can be driving down the road and there'd be a checkpoint and there's all of these carabinieri with AK-47s like milling around in the middle of the road. So you have to stop and they would come kind of check over your car. I mean, for us coming from the United States, seeing a cop milling around in the middle of the road with AK-47 is a little unnerving. Never run a roadblock. So this office was set up with some of those people, and its sole purpose was to exercise control over the most delicate activities of the state. So Colby, who also was a devout Roman Catholic, Gelli gained entry to the Vatican. And basically, talks about him working with a Croatian fascist group during World War II, including members of the Nazi High Command, and helping them escape to South America. Many of the escapees were issued Vatican passports and traveled to their new hiding places in clerical garb. A memo from the intelligence official working at the U.S. State Department in 1947 explained that the Vatican justifies its participation by its desire to infiltrate not only European countries, but Latin American countries as well, dealing with people of all political parties as long as they're not communist and if they are pro-Catholic Church. Okay. The management of what they refer to as the rat line is basically our underground railroad but for Nazis. They call it the rat line. The rat line required Gelly to make frequent visits to Argentina because that obviously was one of the favorite destinations of Nazis, where he became very close to President Juan Perón. And of course, that country was swarming with Nazi criminals, to include Adolf Eichmann, the SS officer responsible for carrying out the final solution for the Jewish problem. This is a quote from the U.S. ambassador, there is no country in the world where the Nazis find themselves in such a strong position as in Argentina. That was thanks in part to Gelly, who helped over 1,600 Nazi scientists and their dependents come to the United States. Many of these Nazis ended up working at aircraft designers like Lockheed Martin and Republic Aviation. The efforts of Gelly and a friar were supported by counterintelligence corps who realized that many of the Nazi scientists, doctors, intel officers, engineers could be of critical importance in the battle against communism. So they shelled out $1,400 to these guys for every war criminal that they trafficked into other countries. How's that? What a way to make money. One of the most notorious Nazis that was under the care of Gelly and this friar was Klaus Barbie, the so-called Butcher of Lions. He was responsible for 4,342 murders and 7,591 deportations to death camps during his 2 years in a French city, Lyons. After the war, U.S. intelligence placed him in a safe house in Augsburg, provided him with sanitary identification, and granted him a generous stipend of $1,700 a month. They like to pay everybody. In 1983, the Justice Department belatedly admitted the U.S. intelligence officials had arranged for Barbie's escape to Bolivia, where he became known as Klaus Altman and opened a sawmill, and that they had lied by denying to Nazi Hunter that he was under their protection. Throughout his 20-year stay in South America, Barbie proved to be of crucial importance to the CIA by forging close ties with the mafia, drug cartel there, training people at Fort Hunt on a U.S. military base and in Panama, and thereby securing a new source of funding for mounting attacks against communism. Everything in the name of communism. The operation of the Rat Line brought Gelly in close contact with future Pope Paul V. At the close of the war, Monsignor Montini had been placed in charge of the Vatican charity that provided protection for German soldiers and Nazi sympathizers. It included issuing travel documents and blah, blah, blah. Some of the people that he helped was Hans Heffelmann and Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary. He played a key role in smuggling over $80 million in gold and silver bars out of the Croatian bank to the Vatican bank. They were very pleased, obviously, for the safekeeping of this gold. But on the way, Gelly managed to steal about 150 of the gold bars for himself. After all, he was an atheist. Gelly, who was a frequent dinner at parties for Vatican dignitaries in homes all over Italy, the former head of military intelligence in Italy and Rome, some of Rome's most powerful laymen. At these affairs, he befriended Cardinal Lecaro, who became one of the four moderators of the Second Vatican Council. And then it just goes on and talks about a whole bunch of other people that he came in contact with. Many of them, Michael Sedona, the guy that we talked about last night, that was the financial advisor for the bank, Massimo Spada, who worked in the Vatican Bank, and other people in the Mafia and CIA. So it talks about how the Genevieve crime family, all of the Mafia, are all working through the Vatican Bank, and using Gelli's ties not only to the IOR, the Vatican Bank, but the Sicilian Mafia, to keep this whole network flowing. And the money that is generated from or laundering through the Vatican Bank comes from the cocaine trade that we talked about last time. Gelli returned from Argentina to his native Italy, where he opened a mattress factory and became director of Permadex. So, has anybody heard about Permadex? Do y'all know anything about them? The best book I can suggest to learn about Permadex is Whitney Webb's book. She talks about Permadex. Permadex is a CIA front company and has been used along with BCCI, which was the CIA's created bank, and not just the CIA. I mean, all of this stuff has to do with Mossad and basically all of the MI5, all of the intel. CIA is not the only one involved in all of this. So Permadex is used as part of all of that. That even had to do with the BCCI, and Permadex had to do with Robert Maxwell's network, because after all, they all have money laundering in common. Permadex, managed by CIA operative Frank Wisner, represented a branch of Gladio that provided arms to the rebel forces in Hungary, and New Orleans businessman Clay Shaw, who shows up. He's the guy that was arrested and questioned in conjunction with JFK's assassination. And it was during his questioning that it was actually came out that the CIA was involved in JFK's murder. Clay Shaw, who is a CIA agent. They were all members of Permadex American Board. So Gelli served as a CIA liaison to the U.S. ambassador, Claire Booth Luce, and became part of the Italian Department of Information, which is called SIFAR, SIFAR. So SIFAR is a clandestine agency to coordinate actions of the Gladio units throughout the country. They're the ones that was basically in charge of propaganda for it. So, excuse me, William Harvey becomes the CIA director chief in Rome and starts an operation called Demagnetize, which authorizes SIFAR to make use of all possible tactics, political, psychological, and paramilitary, to diminish the power of the Italian Communist Party. So here they talk about the strategy of tensions, which I already covered. And this got underway on October 27th, 1962, with the assassination of Enrico Mattei, the founder of Italy's largest oil concern, Intente Nazionale, an Italian word for oil. Such attacks, Gelli would later tell a BCC, were conducted in accordance with Army field manuals by Gladio units. So what's interesting is what you're going to find is a lot of these people they knock off that they say are communists are actually competitors to our and global industrialists. So this is all a false front for them to be able to do whatever they want, wherever they want, all in the name of communism. So if communism is constantly used by these bad guys as the reason, the justification that they're doing all of this, you really have to go back and question the entire premise of communism and why it was created. And as I stated earlier, we know that the Bolsheviks, both Lenin and Trotsky, was funded by the Germans, the Brits, and Americans. They were Trotsky lived in New York City, waiting to go back at the right time. Lenin lived in London, he also transited Germany. So they were all complicit in getting those people back to Russia to turn Russia communist. And now they're using the excuse of it being communist to get away with murder, literally murder. The election day in April 1963, the CIA's nightmare was materialized, and you had 25% of the vote going to communists, which was basically anybody they didn't like. So large unions of construction workers under the influence of the Communist Party held a demonstration in Rome. The CIA became alarmed, and over 200 of the demonstrators using Gladio operators were hurt. Excuse me. Saifar sought to install a government of public safety. It's always for our safety that they're going to do all of these things to us too. So they were getting ready they and the senior officers in the military were getting ready to draft a plan to create a coup in close cooperation with the CIA operator Vernon Walters, William Harvey, and Colonel Renzo Rocco. But at the last minute, that operation was called off. And later on, we have piano solo operation was to have included with the assassination of Prime Minister Moro. And for some reason, something at the last minute was called that off. So, but about 5 years later, the coup planning was exposed. And immediately after it was exposed, Colonel Rocco was found dead in his office of a gunshot wound to his head, which of course was suicide, but it was determined that there's no way he could have done it because of how his body was laid. There was no evidence on him as far as the ballistic material. So he was killed. And then when it was being investigated by General Sigliera, he was found dead on the side of the road, a victim of a mysterious car accident. And then General Manus, who was provided evidence to the commission, he dropped dead about 45 days later. And his assistant, a colonel, shot himself in the heart a month later after that guy died. So now 4 guys are dead because the assassination plot got exposed. They ain't playing around, that's for sure. Okay. So, because of some issues that they were having, they decided that they were going to have to create a state within a state so that it didn't really matter who got elected. They were still going to control everything. Sound familiar? Gelly, at the bidding of Vernon Walters and the CIA officials, underwent an initiation into the Freemasonry and joined the lodge in 1963. Almost overnight, he was promoted to be in charge, Grand Holy Master or whatever they call it, of that lodge. of the P2 Lodge, um, which is crazy because that takes years. So Michael Sedona, the banker guy that was the financial advisor, he's into the lodge. So yeah, what is that? Yeah, it took 5 years for Gelly to be the new worshipful master. And they all had call signs too. His was Filippo. The lodge now received massive influx of cash, estimated about $10 million per month after Gello took it over. From the CIA black funds, this money was used to purchase weaponry material necessary to mount terrorist attacks in Italy, Greece, Turkey, and South America. So Vatican banker Michael Sedona, P2 member, in addition has 30 generals, 8 admirals, newspaper editors, television executives, and top business executives, all in his P2 Mason organization. He takes special pride in inducting Carmelo Spagnuolo to his new secret society because he was the chief public defender in Milan and would later be the president of the Italian Supreme Court. Their government within a government. So within 10 years of Gelly's emergence of worshipful master, P2 had branches in. Now, I want you to listen to these names of these countries and you tell me what they all have in common. Argentina, Venezuela, Paraguay, Bolivia, France, Portugal, Nicaragua, West Germany, and England, and of course the US. Every one of them, like, for example, in France, Charles de Gaulle, they tried to kill him like, I don't know, multiple times. Like over 5 times they tried to assassinate him. You had political unrest in Argentina, Venezuela, Paraguay, Bolivia. So that's the whole reason. Nicaragua, that's the whole reason they were there. Strategy of tension. So also you have all the Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese crime families, but also he also had General Alexander Haig and Henry Kissinger, who joined the lodge. The lodge, as members of Italy's P2 commission later described, was a pyramid with Gelly at the apex. Interesting words. Okay, the CIA conducted massive surveillance of Italian political, religious, and business leaders, supposedly so they could find the communists. Once the new military order was established, these sympathizers were just simply rounded up and shipped off to concentration camps in Sardinia. So much for democracy. Gelly and a general compiled files on over 157,000 people of prominence, including tapes and photographs that could be used as blackmail. Copies of these files were given to both the Vatican and the CIA. Crazy. That's democracy to them. Let's see. So their whole thing was gathering information. And it even is noted, Gelly's files came to contain embarrassing material on John Paul II, who was photographed standing nude next to a swimming pool. If it's possible to take, and he said this, if it's possible to take these photos of the Pope, imagine how easy it would be to shoot him. His words. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the drug stuff. So they have a meeting, and their meetings always seem to occur in Havana. So they have a meeting, and they have a guy, Little Bird Greco, emerges as the Dawn of Dawns, the guy that's, going to be the mafia of all mafias. And he has a pivotal role in narcotics because he owns a fleet of ships. They fly under the Honduran flag, and through Frank Coppola, moved heroin to Santo Traficani Jr. in Cuba, um, under the guise of food shipments. So they basically, and through Sedona, they have complete control as the financial advisor to the Vatican Bank over the money laundering aspect of the drug trade. Um, so they have a dust up in the mafia pecking order. One of the guys got a little too big for his britches, Albert Anastasia. So he gets knocked off, and Genovese presided over a conference that they had, and he anointed himself boss of all bosses. So obviously, that's not going to go over well. And he appointed Carlos Gambini as being in charge of drugging all the blacks in Harlem. And supposedly at this meeting they have, somebody called in and narked them all out, and they all got, well, 4 of them got put in jail. And the raid was caught that caused the breakup of the mob meeting, made national headlines for weeks, embarrassing U.S. officials, and it was the first time that organized crime syndicate mob families were known to be in charge of the illicit drug trade in the United States. So that ended up being a big botched up outfit. Luciano was outraged by the presumption of Gambino being put in charge of the drugs and the other guy making himself in charge of everything. So he decides he's going to clip this Vito Genevieve's wings, and he sets up several of his former gang members to give testimony about this guy, and that Genevieve guy ends up getting 15 years in prison under false testimony. So he's in Atlanta, and Santo Traficano Jr. ends up taking over the international heroin trade because Luciano died in 1962. So Traficano, unlike most mafia, he didn't drive big cars. He lived in Tampa. He ran most of his operations out of Tampa and Miami. Very well-known guy. Did a lot for the community, but he was totally mafia. But he didn't wear rings and drive big cars. He was very understated. Well liked in the community. Not that that matters. So with the Genovese guy out of the way, Michael Sedona, the Vatican financial advisor, has even more of a pivotal role now between the Vatican Bank and the CIA. And the Gambino family says, basically, you tell us who you want killed, and we're going to kill him, with a few choice words in there. So he was not at all uncomfortable with using those tactics. Sedona used the mob money and CIA funds to set up another shell company called Fasco, Fasco AG, and it was a Liechtenstein holding company. One of the things you're going to find out is there's some prominent countries that Lithuania, Liechtenstein, that obviously Switzerland, that have very loose. Cyprus is another one. That anytime you hear Bahamas, the Caymans, if you hear somebody setting up a company or a bank there, it's money laundering, just flat out. Nobody else does business there. So he also purchases his first bank in Italy. And so now he's setting up a network for the drug laundering, because you can't just use the Vatican Bank, as great as that is, because of the secrecy. There has to be multiple companies and banks that are involved in the money laundering so they can lose track of the transactions. William Harvey, the new CIA station chief in Rome, sets up all of the financial firms with a Sir Jocelyn Hambro. of Hambros Bank, which was in England, and David Kennedy, who is part of Continental Illinois Bank in Chicago. These guys become minority shareholders in um, several of Sedona's money laundering apparatuses. And of course, that's very interesting because of the mob connections of Chicago. Um, David Kennedy was kind of he's the one that's in charge of the Continental Illinois Bank in Chicago. Very strange that, I mean, he's a very prominent, he was a very prominent person. And so, same way with Sir Jocelyn Hambro. I mean, he's like great great grandfather was a banker. So they're very um, well positioned. So the first one they talk about was Sir Jocelyn Hambro, the son and heir of England's most prestigious merchant banking families. Um, he was one of the elite jet setters. The mystery relationship was compounded by the fact that Sedona was neither an established figure nor a member of the international banking community when they entered these arrangements. So how would he even know each other? And to create the shell company. The sole explanation for the bizarre partnership resides in the long-standing ties of Hambro to the Intel community. He was one of the founders of the OSS. That's interesting. And his presence on the board of the World Commerce Company, which we found out was set up as a CIA front company for drug running. So there's his connection to Sedano. David Kennedy, the guy in Chicago, appears to be equally puzzling. He was raised on a ranch in Utah. He's a Mormon whose grandparents, John Kennedy and Peter Johnson, formed the Bank of Randolph. In 1951, he became the president of Continental Illinois after serving 16 years as the debt manager for the Federal Reserve. So, of course, that's how he gets, because everybody at the Federal Reserve is part of this whole apparatus. Based in Chicago, Continental Illinois was the seventh largest bank in the country with billions in assets, including shares in an organization which we will probably deal with a little bit later. It's called Opus Dei, which was a bank in Barcelona. It's really dirty. 1955, Kennedy became a conspicuous friend of the conservative Catholic religious order. This friendship resulted in Kennedy's bank becoming the main channel for the Vatican's real estate and corporate investments, an arrangement that brought him in close contact with Prince Massimo Spada, who was part of the Vatican Bank, and Michael Sedona, Spada's dutiful assistant. Through this connection, Kennedy emerged as one of the Gladio's key agents. The Continental Illinois came to serve a major conduit for the flow of covert CIA funds into the newly created bank. In this way, Sedona's bank served as the principal means of launching the 1967 coup in Greece, a Gladio undertaking spearheaded by army officers. Through Kennedy, Sedona developed a close relationship with a guy who he ends up being really bad, Monsignor Paul Marcinkus. He is an up-and-coming cleric in Illinois, the hometown of Al Capone and a bunch of other mafias. As soon as I heard this, I thought of the Pennsylvania guy. Marcinkus was known within the Catholic Church as the gorilla because he was 6'4" in his stocking feet, scratch golfer, and preferred young women. And yes, I said he's a part of the Catholic Church. Marcinkus worked very closely with Kennedy in overseeing the Vatican American investments through the Continental Illinois Bank. He became a director of the bank's branch in Nassau, money laundering. So Marcinkus was singled out to serve as Pope Paul VI's protector. And I guess he was very tiny. This gorilla guy literally picked him up and moved him around if he felt like I guess he was attacked by somebody with a knife in Bolivia. So the guy just picks him up and runs off with him. Sedona was instrumental in getting the gorilla the position as head of the Vatican Bank. So this position made Marcinkus a bishop, and he was assigned as a special assistant to the cardinal. So now you've got Marcinkus from Chicago in charge of the Vatican Bank. Also, Marcinkus was a fellow Mason who submitted to initiation in 1963. His call sign was Marpa. I don't know if there's any significance to those or not because I don't know anything about the Masons. Sedona next acquired another bank, Bank Messina, and then another bank and another bank. So he's basically out buying all these banks on behalf of the Vatican. The Vatican retains partial shares, and then the rest of them, Hambro and Kennedy buy up. So he's now traveling in all of these lofty circles. Sedona bought controlling interest in Libby, which is an American food processing chain with over 1,300 workers in the Chicago area. So he's just buying up, he's laundering money. He's buying up legitimate businesses and real estate in the United States on drug money. So let's see. So back in Chicago, Sam Giancana, the mafia guy in Chicago, becomes one of the agency's underworld agents in the 1960s as part of the money laundering. The Giancana family made deposits in Continental, Illinois. That was their bank of choice. Sedona's banks and the enterprise in Liechtenstein and Milan, transported by Giancana's men to DC. So they were literally part of the money laundering. They brought money to Mexico in suitcase carried by thugs dressed as Catholic priests. The money was ferried out to all these different shell companies, and just like with yesterday's portion, you have a guy in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics basically saying that all of these people, they were untouchable. Even if you got something on them, you couldn't do anything. So what's interesting, and I'm going to say this part here, but we need to do a special segment on how this works because it doesn't make any sense when you think about it originally. The best way, according to the mafia adage, the best way to rob a bank is to buy it. And that has a lot of meaning that we don't have time to go into as part of this, but that's what they do. They buy these banks to basically launder the money through, but they, in essence, they will loan the money out based on the assets that are being laundered, which are gone the next day. And all of those loans are to, buy real estate or whatever. But the real estate that they buy and the businesses that they buy are not based on collateral. So the bank that they own has, bye, see you later, has, so when they come raid the bank, the people who have all of the real estate based on the loans still have all the real estate based on the loans. They don't have to pay them back because the bank's gone. That's how they steal. That's how they enlarge their riches, is they initially launder the money and then they loan out money based on the reserves that they have that they're not going to have the next day. And then they have no intentions of getting repaid for those loans. Those loans are made to family members or whatever, who go and buy all of these businesses and stuff, houses, castles, mansions, whatever. And then they just have all the assets and they say, oh, the bank went out of business. And you'll find in some of these stories, when the banks were in the United States, our FDIC would give billions of dollars to bail these banks out knowing damn good and well they were bad and why they were bad. So now we've got $2 billion in a bailout gone. And the debt was only like, I don't know, 400 million. It's just another money laundering effort. So Gladio's strategy of tension is part of this whole thing. The $22 billion eventually lost by Sedona and his lost by his compatriots in their banking ventures seemed to vanish into thin air. But of course it didn't. CIA operatives, including Paul Helliwell, who we talked about yesterday, William Colby, Donald Beasley, David Kennedy, Sedona, was not to produce dividends for shareholders, but rather to chalk up losses in a bewildering array of bogus ventures. It's not bewildering at all, it's planned. Gladio's vision of a new world order created through the dissolution of political ideologies hostile to American capitalism. And that's just garbage. Again, we've already dismissed that. The New World Order has nothing to do with the preservation of American capitalism. The New World Order has to do with a pan-European vision of them in control of the world. And most of you already realize that most of the elite in the United States traces their roots either back to England, Germany, and they have no real American loyalties, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. We also talked about earlier, Brian and I did, about a lot of them. When I first started doing this, I was kind of shocked, but a lot of them have roots to Russia. And because of actions and long-standing feuds in Russia and their hurt feelings, they view this attack on Russia now as almost like a vengeful thing to them, like to get back for some right that was done to their family a long time ago, whether they were thrown out of Russia or whatever. And some of them were. So, yeah, I don't buy the whole we're trying to preserve American capitalism. That's a joke. So anyway, it just goes on and talks about how they set up the financial setup. And as the part that we're not focused on right now is all of the drugs flowing into the United States, because that's what's generating all this money that they're throwing around. And in New York City alone, by 1969, there were over 40,000 heroin addicts. And the number was on the rise between 7,000 and 9,000 a year in 1969. That's just crazy. And these people didn't care. It was all to further their goals of creating a new world order by drugging people. Sedona was more than a CIA operative and Vatican financial advisor. He was also a theft. So now we get into I don't want to go into too much detail because there's a lot of, percentages and all that kind of stuff that the author gets into just to validate that he has the evidence and it's not just making the allegations that there was a lot of money being siphoned off as Sedona was acting as the financial advisor to the Vatican. So we'll just leave it at that. That there is one other one, a thing called money Rex. Bordoni, which is the part he works with Sedona, they set up a massive international brokerage company called Money Rex. I did not look into that separately, but basically in 1964, Money Rex established relations with 850 client banks through the world and conducted business in excess of $200 billion a year. Through this brokerage firm, Italy's richest and most powerful individuals squirreled away enormous fortunes illegally and safely in foreign banks. Sedona performed the service as a commission that fluctuated between 15 and 20%. He also kept a private ledger that incriminated his confidential clients. This list would serve as his lifesaver when his bloated corporation vessel sank. In 1967, the IRS agents became aware that Sedona was involved in drug trafficking in the Gambino clan. The case came to center not on heroin, but on the illicit movement of depressant, stimulant, and hallucinogenic drugs between Italy, the United States, and European countries. Now, what's very interesting about that is the date, 1967. And I'm going to look at comments. Who's going to be the first one to tell me what was going on in 1967 with hallucinogenic drugs? Who's going to tell me? Come on, I know y'all know what we talk about it. Not the first one. Anybody? No, come on. Somebody knows LSD. And who was using the LSD in 1967? The CIA. And where were MK Ultra? God, you guys are awesome. I knew you'd get it. So you've got MK Ultra going on in San Francisco, all part of that whole Laurel Canyon thing, and you got the guys right here. Isn't that funny? Not funny, because it's not funny, but there's this circle of evil, and no matter what dig you do, you come, and that's why it's so important that we all do this together and we all know all of this. So when we come across things like that, you're like, 1967, that's Laurel Canyon. That's the whole drug thing and the anti-Vietnam thing, and they're transporting hallucinogenic. Oh, MK Ultra. So snap, snap, snap. Y'all are on it. Okay. So now, keep in mind, last time we were talking about how the drugs were shifting from where it had been in China, and they were moving it into Burma. And Chiang is the nationalist that the CIA had basically, they did a coup in China. This Chiang guy got put in charge, and then Mao Zedong mounted his communist takeover, which some people say he was actually a nationalist, and it was Chiang who was a CIA puppet and not a nationalist at all, that was being propped up by the CIA, and Mao Zedong was the one that was trying to get him out, because Chiang basically sold everything out to, sold the poppy fields out to the CIA. So when he got pushed down into Burma, he basically did the same thing in Burma. He turned the entire country into a poppy field. So you still have poppy fields in Laos and Thailand, with the members of the Hmong families. In 67, CIA operatives Theodore Shackley and Thomas Klein were assigned to establish heroin refineries with the aid of the Corsican mafia, who permeated Saigon. This is about ready to piss you off, because you realize why we were over there. The only reason we were over there was for the drugs. Shackley arranged for Santo Tropicana to visit Saigon and meet the drug lords. And this meeting was to set up the supply for the ever-increasing demand. Tropicani also met with prominent Corsican gangsters to assure them of increased shipments to their labs in Marseille. When the old Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs launched their Operation Eagle in 1968, it found itself arresting scores of CIA employees, many of whom had been working directly for Trafficano Conti. But although it arrested several of his deputies, they could not get the Johnson or Nixon administration to go after Trafficani directly. In 1971, Congress was getting so many complaints about GIs returning addicted to heroin, this investigation went nowhere. The CIA insisted on loaning some of its special agents to the Narcotic and Dangerous Drugs Office as investigators. The agents turned out to be the same men who had assisted setting up the networks. So in 1969, proved to be a banner year for Sedona. He stood as the most powerful financial figure in Italy, in charge of the whole banking, money laundering, drug operation. He owned 6 banks, a hotel chain, and 500 other companies. So 40% of the shares traded on any given day was under his control on the Italian stock market. So, and that's just mind-boggling to me. So they talk about how that treaty, the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which is what set up the Catholic entity that we were talking about at the beginning of our show, Mussolini's arrangements with the Catholic to fix the long-standing feud of what they owed each other. The the Catholic Church leading up to that was basically about bankrupt before the 1929. They were given a bunch of money as payment from the state of Italy. And so that kind of set up the beginning of the Catholic Church and their status, the tax-free status, how their offshore financial firms were held. The Roman Catholic Church was financially powerful, and they had basically no interference with the Vatican finances. So Pope Paul handed Sedona an agreement he already had prepared. The agreement was even more than the mafioso could have hoped for. It named Sedona the leading banker of the Roman Curia. It granted him complete control over the Vatican's foreign and domestic investment policies. Sedona would work closely with Bishop Marcinkus, the guy from Chicago, who now became secretary to the bank, the Vatican Bank, and the governor of Vatican City. However, both clerics remained merely his advisors. The agreement placed the Vatican's billions of dollars at Sedona's disposal. When the mafia chieftain turned to the last page, he looked up at the Holy Father and smiled. The Pope already had signed and sealed the document, displaying the greatest trust anybody could have in basically a criminal. So before Sedona took control of the assets, the Vatican held major interest in the Rothschild Bank in France, Chase Manhattan Bank, and 57 branches in 44 countries, including Credit Suisse in Zurich, the Morgan Bank, the Bankers Trust, GM, General Electric, Shell Oil, Gulf Oil, and Bethlehem Steel. And what's interesting about that is we are now in, let's see, that would have been, you're only like 25 years out from when they were bankrupt. So this all happened with drug money. Let's see, 90% of the Italian steel was under the control of the Vatican. The Holy See controlled 2 shipping lines, Alfa Romeo car manufacturing company, and hotels. But the Vatican Central Holding, they owned a construction company. So you just see how huge this is. After he took control of it, he bought Italy's water company, like the biggest one in Italy. He bought a pharmaceutical company, which produced birth control pills, which we know nothing they did with their money had anything to do with the church beliefs, because they had an atheist there. So, and they're all Masons. So he was all out investing all of their money, buying all these companies. And then eventually, let's see, we get to investments in the Fasco, AG and Liechtenstein, Transcontinental. There's an Iraqi businessman who's later convicted of fraud for $504 million in a corrupt scandal with the French oil company that Sedona gets in business with. He has, says here that the Iraqi guy that he was involved with was the bag man for Saddam Hussein. In recent years, the Baghdad billionaire became a major contributor to the political campaign of Barack Obama. Holy crap. In addition to him, David Rockefeller and other financiers and U.S. Intelligence officials and members of Rockefeller's family became shareholders in a company that this guy bought through the Vatican Bank. So anyway, he's out buying. Sedona proceeded to liquidate the church's remaining holdings in the Italian companies to buyers, including Hasbro Bank, Continental Illinois, and American conglomerate Gulf and Western. He invested much of the Vatican's revenue from these sales in American companies such as Chase Manhattan, Standard Oil, Westinghouse, Colgate, Procter & Gamble, and Dan River. The oligarch industrial complex, international syndicate in America. There you go. Several of these firms remained under the control of David Rockefeller. Shocker. The liquidation of the Vatican's holdings, as engineered by Sedona, produced a dangerous effect on the Italian economy. The shares of Italian companies in which the Holy See had invested plummeted to record low. The lira dropped precipitously, and millions of families was wiped out overnight. Doesn't that sound exactly like what George Soros did to the British pound? By George, it does. During this time, Sedona developed a close relationship with Charles Bluedorn of Gulf and Western. The two men engaged in trading worthless stocks back and forth at face value to create a false market. In 1972, the SEC demanded a halt to the ceaseless exchange of securities between the two associates. During this time, Gulf and Western, through its motion picture company Paramount Pictures, was filming The Godfather. You can't make this up, right? You have these guys in all of this mafia crap going on, and the guy that owns Paramount Pictures filming The Godfather is in bed with a mafia. A glamorous look at the life of the mafia. And then it names a couple other real estate and construction companies that they had purchased from the Vatican, owned by Paramount Studios in Hollywood, where the film was shot. These arrangements gave them profits into Sedona's banks and holding companies, along with the billions of dollars he'd already made in heroin. So, oh my gosh, you just can't make this up. All right, hold on. Let me check these comments. I'm sorry, I've got to compose myself. Let's back in. Intel funded by Moscow. Okay. Everything is connected. You're absolutely right. Paramount CIA. I absolutely, after reading this, I believe you. Loans arranged by CIA to fund Black Ops. Yep. You got it. Y'all are on it. Okay. So the rise of Sedona, the financial mafia. They talk about how what some of the factors leading into all of this, the bank secrecy, the lack of central control. I mean, it's almost like they're trying to justify the Bank of International Settlements or some of these, the World Bank or whatever. I disagree a little on some of his conclusions. But anyway, so we get up to 1969 and we meet another of Sedona's friends, Roberto Calvi. He's also a Mason in the P2 organization, and he's the assistant manager at one of the banks, Banco Ambrosiano, which is a bank for very wealthy people in Milan. It was established in 1894. It operated to provide credit without offending the ethical principles of Christian teaching. So this bank, you were supposed to, in order to bank there, it was basically a Catholic bank. You had to have a voucher of good character from your parish priest. Now, I want you to just let that sink in for a second. You got guys that are in charge of murdering people, blowing things up, and a bank that requires a voucher of good character to bank at. Okay. So Sedona decides that he's got to have this bank, and he comes up with a plan to gain control of the bank through the creation of a series of shell companies in Panama, Bahama, and Luxembourg. Because it's ran by the Catholic Church above reproach, the perfect target for money laundering. So in 1969, there's a banner year for Operation Gladio. The radical left has, been held at bay. NATO's involvement in Vietnam, the breakdown of the traditional Catholic doctrine in the wake of the Vatican II, updating the rise in counterculture that viewed Che Guevara and Chairman Mao as folk heroes. And so you have this, again, strategy of pressure. They're looking at what they view as the communist threat, and the time was right for the CIA to unleash the full force of Gladio strategy of tension, which will cause the people of Italy to view the communists as a threat to their lives and well-being. Such as a strategy would serve as the antithesis to the prevailing thoughts and bring in inaugurating a new world order. So that's where we're going to stop tonight. That kind of sums up a good overview. We're going to go into the first false flag terroristic adventure in the next chapter. So we will do that either, hopefully, it'll probably be Tuesday. I have Moms for Liberty tomorrow. So that'll have my focus most of the day. If I can squeeze one in tomorrow night, I will. But otherwise, we can look at being here on Tuesday. And if y'all have any questions about anything we talked about, sounds like social scores. Who says, Carby, 1963, you have a source for what? What were we talking about? Oh, you're welcome. Unicorn. My favorite. I have my own collection of unicorns. Okay. Let me know if y'all have any questions. The Paramount. Oh, you have a source for the Paramount? Yeah, shoot me whatever you got. Put it on. Thank you, Beta. Put it on my True Social. I love y'all. The whole reason I even found out about Operation Gladio is because someone on True Social suggested that I read The Third Way. Which, if y'all haven't read that book, number one, I suggest you get the book. But if you don't want to read the book, go to my Substack. It's under Colonel Towner. And I'll put a link up as soon as I get off here. As a matter of fact, I'll do it while we're talking. Let me log in real quick. We have the entire thing, and tonight I'm making all of them free. The last two that were behind a paywall, as soon as I get off here, we're going to make them free. So you'll be able to read the whole series. And I cannot recommend a book more highly than this book, because this book was amazing. It shows it's what clued me in on the Operation Gladio because he talks about it. He talked about the Madrid Circular, which was um, a publication that was written in 1950 that outlined every single thing, the change in strategy of the that goes to segment one, and there's 5 segments. The Madrid Circular talked about it mapped out everything that the Nazis were going to do, the Operation Gladio, everything. And it was written in 1950. And there's only one aspect of it that has not yet occurred, just because of timing. And I'm having a senior moment right now. I don't remember what that was, but if that one last thing happens, the guy will have batted 1,000% on every one of his predictions. So it's incredible book, documenting. He has references for everything, and the cliff notes is what I put on Substack. It was a project my daughter and I worked on. Very proud of it. It also will kind of dovetail to everything that we're talking about. It's a great foundation, so suggest y'all go. The title and author. So it's called The Third Way, and the guy that wrote it was Joseph Farrell. But just hit on that Substack. I quote him at the front of every one of them. I put the name of the book and the author's name. I need to buy that book. Yeah, the book's awesome. And we absolutely see, and that's a good question. Can we stop them this time? So I think the whole reason why, the answer to that question is absolutely. I think I just had this conversation with Brian Cates when he came over for dinner. Everything is different now. Everything. I believe. So let me also point this out. We talked about it, I think, yesterday or the day before. Trump gave a speech in Poland at the beginning of his presidency. And he said in the speech, Russia is not the problem. There is a terrorist network that has to be defeated. And we are going to defeat it. So to me, when I reread that, I heard it, but there was an incident that came up that brought it to my attention again. And when I reread it, after having discovered Operation Gladio, I was dumbfounded. So it just made that speech make all the more sense. He was telling us he knows about Operation Gladio. He knows what had gone on. So I believe 100% that all of those, I got them all, exactly. All of the trips that he did to Saudi Arabia. So one of the primary focuses, which this guy doesn't focus on because he's trying to tie the Catholic Church to Operation Gladio, but Egypt. Egypt was one of Hitler's and Galen's initial focus. Muslim Brotherhood is a Gladio creation. ISIS is a Gladio creation. Every terrorist network is a Gladio connection. So he went to all of the places he knows that they were, and he worked with the governments there. I honestly believe that's exactly why all those princes in Saudi Arabia were imprisoned and excommunicated from the family, because they were all involved in the terror networks. So I honestly believe that it is being worked on in the background. I think that's the whole reason why Russia is in Ukraine. Ukraine was one of the terrorist training camps. All of those Nazis that are the literal Nazis that are there, the Azov battalions. Yes, I know he went to the Vatican. And the Nazis that were in Ukraine were part of the training network used to train these terror cells. So you have every bit of their empire basically being taken apart. And we don't see the extent to which it's happening, but if you follow Trump's path while he was president and you listen to the words, that's why I felt so um, excited about having this conversation, either with the book reviews on Substack or this podcast, and communicating with you guys. Because once you see what our history was, you can see what's going on now much clearer. Because if you understand that school shootings are part of this terror network, and it has to do with the pharmaceuticals that they're giving kids, the Hitler Youth, all of that stuff plays into all of this. And it's so important that we understand what our history was, because you will see how they tried repeating it in multiple places and what they all have in common. And then you're going to also see the splintering of it. Because if they could still be doing all of these things, if there was still a viable network of Operation Gladio in the United States, do you think Trump would still be alive? No, because it's that very network that took out JFK. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Final Judgment. That book documents unequivocally that every single person that we're talking about in this book, every mafia person, that Clay guy, the only thing this book leaves out is Mossad connection. But everything else, these exact same people, these terror cells, the shooters came from that France special ops unit that tried to take out Charles de Gaulle. They were disbanded. He got rid of them. They were disgruntled. They were part of the Gladio network, and they were basically hired by the CIA to come to Dallas. So it all comes full circle, and that's why we're here. I do want to do Final Judgment as one of our books, but because the third way we just finished doing on Substack, I wanted to cover this book to do a deeper dive into Operation Gladio because of its relevance to today and all of the scare tactics. It's so important that you guys understand the cattle prod theory that we just created, which I'm going to use forever now, that the cattle prod on the left and the cattle prod on the right, manufactured by the same people to make you move like cattle in the direction that they want you to move, which is towards the New World Order. And we're not going. That's the bottom line. We're not going. So the only way we don't go is if we understand this and we know the people to support and the people not to support. Right, patterns. You're absolutely right, Beta. It is so important to understand patterns, because if one thing happens, somebody can argue that it's just a one-off, but when they're continuing the pattern, it's not a one-off anymore. So what else we got? Using car dealerships to transport drugs. Yeah. I do think the Las Vegas shooting does have a lot to do with this. And as we get further in the book, I'll tell you why. Hegelian dialect. The Hegelian dialect comes up a lot. You're absolutely right. You all are bright, brilliant. I love it. Okay, so that's it for tonight. And like I said, we'll probably be back here on Tuesday. I will try to do it at the same time. Obviously, this was a good time. We had a lot of people and a lot of. I love the live chat, which is the only reason I even wanted to try this. So, y'all, yay for being here. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Love it. So, I will see you on Tuesday. Bye.